Kate Briquelet is a senior reporter with the Daily Beast. She has covered crime and corruption for the Daily Beast, and she's also appeared in many documentaries, I've noticed. What was the one? I watched the Epstein one recently, and she popped up, and I was like, oh, it's Kate. Love it. She's been on 48 Hours, American Greed, Dateline. You have, like, if I can say so, like the sexiest reporting gig.
Wow, thank you.
It's fun. It's fascinating. It's covering like powerful people and corruption, and this trial must be like, is there ever a boring day in the trial?
You know, there wasn't. Every day of this trial brought something new, some bombshell or piece of the puzzle. And so this was an exciting one to cover. I think a lot of us are shocked it's over now. And as I'm sure
Maybe.
you've read, a little over a week later, the saga continues.
Okay, so let's, without burying the lead, the state of the trial, there's some news about there potentially being a mistrial. So let's start with that and then kind of rewind, if we can, about like what the convictions were. So what happened last week?
So soon after the trial wrapped up, a juror has gone on sort of a media tour describing what it was like during the negotiations and how his personal experience basically persuaded some of the jurors who were skeptical of the victims to come to the other side. So now some people believe that the verdict is in jeopardy. And because this juror did not mention on his jury questionnaire that he had a past history of sexual abuse, that he had experienced sexual abuse himself. You know, at jury selection, the reporters that were there, including myself, we saw quite a few people who had answered that question be dismissed from the jury. And so if you're Ghislaine Maxwell's legal team, you're going to argue, hey, this guy never said he had experienced sexual abuse in the past. Now he's coming forward in media interviews saying that he did so. You know, does this mean that Ghislaine got an unfair trial at this point? Does it mean that if he wasn't on the jury, that she might have been acquitted? That's what they're arguing. And I think we're kind of surprised also that they're arguing for a retrial. I mean, if you were Ghislaine, would you want to risk it all over again? Some of the victims' lawyers that I've spoken to have said, you know, fine, if there's a retrial, there's probably going to be more witnesses lined up against her, that they know of other people who've since come forward since the verdict who said, I will testify against Ghislaine. So it's funny that she would want to risk a retrial, but that might be all she has. Or perhaps they're going to use this juror's comments as ammo as part of their appeal. I mean, as soon as the verdict came down, you know, hours later, Ghislaine's lawyer, Bobby Sternheim, came outside, wished everybody a happy new year, said she was disappointed with the verdict, but that they were currently working on the appeal. So what's next in this case? I don't know. I think the jurors' comments and, you know, legal experts saying that this puts the verdict in jeopardy, it's just another twist in this whole case.
I mean, I was talking about this with David, our producer, earlier today. So let's pretend, and I understand you're not a legal expert, you're reporting on this, but I'm curious if this kind of argument has brought up. So it's one thing to not disclose that you are a sexual assault survivor, and from what I understand, there may have been others on the jury who also did not. But another thing I was thinking was, okay, so say there is a case in which there was sexual harassment in the workplace, right? And the person that was being prosecuted for some, sexual harassment situation, if you're a woman who has worked in the world and you're asked that question, what are you going to take that person off of the jury? I mean, it doesn't make sense. So why is it that this one situation can inform and others are not? Like, how do they decide which questions could potentially affect a jury's mindset?
Well, you know, all of the prospective jurors had to fill out a jury questionnaire. And the question said, have you or a family member or a friend experienced sexual abuse, assault, harassment? And then there were some follow-up questions that said, would this impact your ability to be impartial in the case? And according to reports, we don't know exactly what's happened yet. There hasn't been an inquiry, but this guy reportedly checked no. And then during jury deliberations came forward to say, you know, I experienced childhood sexual abuse. So there's questions as to whether he would even be on the jury if he would have checked yes and answered truthfully, right?
Mm.
There's a chance the judge might not have dismissed him, but later on, the prosecutors and the defense have the chance to strike jurors, you know, in what's known as peremptory strikes. So they would have a shot at getting him off the jury had they known that he had experienced sexual assault before. And I guess there's questions as to whether that impacted his ability to be a partial juror in this case.
Mhm.
I mean, we don't know. I mean, it's not to say that if you experience sexual abuse that you can't be a juror in a sexual abuse case, but there's just questions as to whether or not he was an impartial juror in
Right.
this matter.
What was she convicted of, and what did they? And also, you know, with that being said, what was her defense?
Well, Ghislaine was convicted on 5 of 6 charges related to child sex trafficking, most notably sex trafficking conspiracy. The one charge she was not convicted of was enticing a minor to travel for illegal sexual activity. I think the jury just took issue with the word enticement and whether or not she enticed them, whether she persuaded them, whether she coerced them. It just wasn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And if I remember correctly, that charge related specifically to just one victim, Jane. So Ghislaine's argument this entire time has been that she's a scapegoat. She's a stand-in for Jeffrey Epstein. She had nothing to do with his crimes. You know, Ghislaine's lawyer came out swinging in opening arguments saying that she's being blamed for the behavior of bad men. You know, ever since Eve tempted Adam with the apple, women have been blamed for the bad behavior of men. That's precisely what her attorney told jurors in opening statements. So her argument is, I didn't have anything to do with this. I was his employee. I, you know, took care of his homes, etc. I did not take part in the sexual abuse or facilitate the sexual abuse of underage girls. Of course, the prosecution argued, you were involved in virtually every detail of Jeffrey Epstein's life. How could you not know that this was going on? And not only that, you helped him abuse underage girls.
She was an employee of his, but they were also in a relationship. And then when did they did stop talking at one point, like pretty far back, right?
Well, yes, I guess their relationship started out romantic, and prosecutors made a point of showing that with all of those photos that just flashed on the screen just now, all of their sort of happier days photographs, them kissing, hugging, Ghislaine giving him a foot massage. They were close. They were, you know, thick as thieves, some would say. And eventually the romance faded and she became his employee, which is obviously unusual, but the prosecution argued they were extremely close. Ghislaine says that she left his life, you know, I think sometime in the mid 2000s. So it's unclear, but in some of the court records that were released as part of the victim Virginia Giuffre's defamation suit against Ghislaine, it was clear they were at least in email contact in recent years. So who knows how close they were, you know, up until the point that he was arrested.
Okay, now this is the part where I think folks who are watching this trial are really interested in knowing is, are we ever going to potentially learn through who knows what channels who some of these folks were that could have, I mean, we know about Prince Andrew and of course, you know, there's Trump but are the details going to come out beyond the black book? Are there going to be more experiences shared, more folks who come forward? Is there any sort of sense of that right now?
Sure. When you speak to victims and victims' lawyers, they're arguing this can't be the end. The case can't end with Ghislaine. Perhaps this is just the beginning, right? People were hopeful that Ghislaine would try to make some sort of deal and cough up dirt on some of these powerful men, including Prince Andrew, who's been a longtime friend of hers, or some political players like Bill Clinton or Donald Trump, who were part of Epstein's inner circle. And I'm not suggesting that they were involved in any of the sexual misconduct, but there were many powerful people that were involved with Epstein, whether financially or perhaps, as it's been alleged, have taken part in the sexual abuse too. So I don't think that this case is over. I think there's more to come. The victims are certainly rallying for prosecutors to target other people and perhaps lean on them to collaborate and cooperate. So, yeah, we'll see what happens next. I guess we have to also get through Ghislaine's appeal process, but I think victims are hopeful that more charges will come down.
Let's talk about the money a little bit, because it's been very confusing for, I think, a lot of folks to understand where the money was coming from. I mean, we've read reports, and I think you report on this quite a bit, about how Epstein's money just was suddenly he was wealthy, and you know, were they using fronts to move money? Like, was this an actual operation that was being financed? I guess, like, we're just trying to figure out structure. Like, how did this operate? Was the goal to be a sex trafficking group financed through some other entities? Was there some sort of foreign aspect here? I mean, there have been a lot of conversations about him potentially working for a foreign government, collecting information on leaders and powerful, you know, business leaders as well. Do we have any sense of how this enterprise worked?
You know, we only know what we see now, and that's the tip of the iceberg. I think this is one of the most enduring mysteries of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, is where did his money come from? We know that Limited Brands chairman, Victoria's Secret honcho, Les Wexner, had basically given Epstein a massive portion of his wealth and transferred the title to his property in Manhattan, his Manhattan townhouse to him. You know, and Les Wexner was Epstein's only known client for a while. Most recently, we're hearing about billionaire Leon Black paying Epstein millions and millions of dollars, and allegedly for financial services, right? So if these two powerful billionaires are leaning on Epstein for financial services, there must be more people out there. I think the sex trafficking is only one part of what Epstein was doing. So the finances are still a big mystery. I think people were hoping some of that stuff would be revealed at Maxwell's trial, but it wasn't. So people who were hoping to learn more about the vast conspiracy and the finances were disappointed, right? I think that this is a mystery that still needs to be unsolved. Perhaps it will be through civil suits. Perhaps prosecutors are exploring this angle. I mean, there's been questions about the fact that, well, the U.S. Attorney's Office Public Corruption Unit has been handling this case. Are public officials complicit here? You know, is there more to this story? And we think so. Perhaps prosecutors are taking this one defendant at a time. We don't know.
And in terms of foreign aspects, what are people what's been floated out there in terms of, I know that Maxwell's father, you know, he had his own backstory when it came to the Israeli government. Does that overlap with this?
You know, I can't say this definitively. I just know there's been rumors swirling about perhaps Epstein and Maxwell being involved with Israeli intelligence. There's also been things floating out there about Epstein being involved with the CIA. One of Epstein's former bodyguards and drivers had said that he actually was sent to CIA headquarters to drop off or pick up a book or something. And that was a strange story. I think that was detailed in one of the victim's lawyer's books, Brad Edwards' book. He said that this man was sent to CIA headquarters for something, which is pretty unusual. There are questions as to how well connected Epstein was and if that branched into the intelligence world. And we don't know yet.
I'm so curious what the book was. Do you know?
Brad Edwards' book.
No, the
It's
book that they picked up at the
Oh, the book that they picked up? I don't know. Yeah, that was not elaborated on, but, this former employee of Epstein was terrified of him
I
and, his
understand.
practices, right? And if you try to contact him now, I mean, he will not talk to you. He doesn't want anything to do with it. He basically has said, "Be careful of these people." So, um,
Wow.
I think
How
that's
are
why
you feeling as a
yeah.
reporter who's been covering this? I mean, and there's like a whole other story about the people who are in the courtroom too. I mean, you've been covering this. Have you been in the courtroom the whole time?
Well, because of COVID, there are very few courtroom seats. I did get into the courtroom one day, but the rest of us, a large portion of the press and public, were watching this from overflow rooms on a video screen, which was interesting because you can actually see Maxwell at her table, as opposed to, a view behind her. It certainly has been a wild ride. Every day Ghislaine came to court, she was very huggy and handsy with her lawyers, very affectionate with her lawyers. And they truly believe that she's innocent and are standing by her.
Wow. Okay, last question, because there's just so much here. What was the deal with her sketching the sketch artist? This is insane. What does she do? Is this like a psychological game?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what to say about that. I think it feels like a psychological game to some of us. You would think she wouldn't be very bored sitting in the hot seat when her life is on the line, right?
Yeah.
It feels like a psychological power play, but who knows? I had
Ooh.
also read a report that her family had hired some other courtroom sketch artists to paint her in a more flattering light. I don't know if that's true. Um, but yeah, this trial seemed to have a lot of stories about this courtroom sketch artist, and who knows why Ghislaine was drawing these people, but hopefully we won't have to find out in a retrial. Hopefully,
Right.
we're nearing the end of this particular case and moving on to some other ones.
And she's on suicide watch right now. Is that a real thing?
She's been on suicide watch as far as I know from the moment she entered the prison, which is why she's complained about her conditions behind bars, saying that it's been invasive. She's said some serious things. She hasn't had decent food. Her food has had maggots in it. They're shining flashlights in her eyes, every 15 minutes. She can't sleep. There was a photo, I don't know if you remember earlier this year, that they released, and it showed her having sort of a black eye in jail. And they suggested perhaps it's because she has to shield her eyes from the light. So, according to her, because Epstein killed himself in prison, they're handling her, much more severely and keeping this invasive eye on her to make sure she doesn't do anything.
Really interesting. Kate, yeah, you've got many years of this work. There's a whole cottage industry that's formed outside of their, industry, whatever that industry really is.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read your books. I'm assuming that you're going to have some amazing book that comes out of this.
Right.
Really fascinating.
We'll see where the saga goes next. We're definitely not done with this story. We're not done with Ghislaine Maxwell yet. We're not done with any of the other people that were connected to Epstein. So to be continued.
To be continued. Kate Briquelet, thank you so much and take
Bye.
care.